There you go.
Okay. All right, so we are live with the panel People and Culture. And since this is a panel, we don't have anything that we're going to present or any, hard topics that we're going to focus on. So if you have questions or if you want to engage with us during the panel, feel free to reach out in the chat or using the Q&A function, preferably the chat, because that will just be easier for us to monitor. And I'll be your host. I'm Simon Aronsson. I work at K6 as the head of developer relations, and I do a lot of SRE kind of stuff and build tooling around our software, things like that. I've been working with DevOps and SRE kind of tasks for the last 10 or 12 years or so. So over to Johannes.
Hello, I'm Johannes. I'm working in a DevOps team at Deutsche Bahn, the German railway organization. And I'm doing DevOps for 2 years now, and hope to share some insights. And I give over to Howard.
Well, thank you. I'm Howard Deiner. I live a little bit outside of New York City. I own and operate Deiner Soft, which I basically do a lot of training and coaching. I'm a very technical sort of a person. And for the last 5 years or something, I've been concentrating on testing and DevOps and automation. And if called upon, I'll also do weddings and bar mitzvahs. And that leaves Ricardo.
Yeah, thank you, Howard. My name is Ricardo. I'm from Porto, Portugal. For the past few years, I've been working more in automation, DevOps, SRE roles with more focus on SRE type of jobs in the last couple of years. I came from a traditional developer background into the operations world, mostly by necessity. I was working at a company that we actually needed to outsource a bunch of stuff, and we needed to automate infrastructure and pipelines and that kind of stuff. And that's how I got into the more DevOps operations kinds of roles. And I actually enjoyed it a lot and went with it since then.
All right. So just to kick off the conversation a bit, I thought we might just describe a little bit how we're currently organizing our teams. Maybe you want to start answering that, Ricardo?
Yeah, sure. So I'm part of a cross-company team. So we have, actually, we are part of a cluster that is now starting to divide in functions. So the company has grown. So I'm part of the SRE team, and we mostly manage infrastructure, and we are responsible for the reliability of the platform. We have something that we call the DevOps team, and they are mostly focused on automation, pipeline automation, deploy automation. And we have a kind of platform team that actually builds libraries that other teams actually use. So that's mostly our cluster, and we are a cross-functional, cross-company cluster. And then we have the traditional agile development teams that have developers, Q&A personnel, product managers, product owners, and those are usually self-functioning. We try as much as possible to build tools and offload some of those capabilities to the teams themselves, either via automation or documentation, and helping them on how to guide it. And that's how we are actually able to scale to the company to a few hundred. We are roughly around 350 people at the moment, but we're planning on growing. But that's mostly how we are organized at the company right now. And I hand it to Howard, for example.
Okay, thanks. I've been a big proponent of culture over the last few years, and the idea of a DevOps culture. Too many organizations, you mentioned the word, Ricardo, agile. Too many organizations feel that they adopt something like SAFe or whatever they adopt, and they naturally gravitate back towards the way that they're used to doing things. So they get, and put silos in place. You do this, we'll all communicate, we'll have blah, 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 blah. And then they put tickets in place. And when they're done, it hurts. The lead times to get something through a team become atrocious once again. So I believe in that, cross functionality. I don't need you to be the very best at doing something. I need you to be able to do it when you need to, and I need you to learn and improve. So from a cultural perspective, I'm always asking organizations to, learn, be confident, do what has to get done, and don't rely on experts that you have to wait in line with a ticket for.
That's actually really interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm thinking of many of the shops that I've been working at, how they usually start with something like ITIL and do this whole incident problem and request workflows, and then they come to the conclusion that, okay, this doesn't work, so we need to do Scrum is usually the answer most turn to, and they start to implement Scrum. And they do this clean cut where they want to do pure Scrum, but they soon realize that, okay, this is hurting as well because it's too unfamiliar to us. And they start to gradually implement things like SAFe or other, organizational tools to get this to work. And soon they end up in the same place they were when they started. They're back to something like ITIL, but with the added administrative overhead of actually doing sprint plannings and retrospectives and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that so many times we go into the point that we actually choose a tool or some kind of framework or methodology without actually speaking to the people to try to really understand what the problem is. And we say, so now we are using DevOps. No one knows what the hell what that is. Actually, we see that a lot. For instance, like now we're going to use Kubernetes. Like, why are we going to use this? Why are we going to use this? So we've been building stuff X, Y, and Z. So why are we going to use this? What is going to change? What does this mean for us? And it's exactly the same thing with SAFe or Scrum or whatever or kind of methodology. We just throw something in the mix and hope it fixes everything, and usually it doesn't.
Yeah. It's funny how people trust that other people are doing it right and we're not. And if organizations would trust the people that they so carefully hired to do their jobs and don't impose this process on top of stuff, who cares what the process is? Let it be anything you want, but let the people do their jobs. And I think of root cause of all that stuff is distrust. And that's a sad state of affairs.
So you're talking about self-organization and responsibility, because we have all these processes. Because we have all these processes like ITIL and ISO, and we have to fulfill them, and we still do DevOps at our company. So, but we are transitioning from a traditional approach to self-organizing teams. So we have a lot of responsibility in the teams now that they do the right thing. And I think the mind shift is to go to a service mindset. So you're developing a product. So your team develops a product and offers this as service, and then the people come into play.
Definitely, I'm thinking it's so hilarious to me that you say that you want to be agile and that you want to try to be realistic about what you're doing and how you take actions based on that, but then you also say in the same sentence that everyone needs to be agile in the exact same way across the company, and it doesn't really make sense, right? Because then it's just another rigid process that we're following.
Yeah, I agree. I've been in that situation of actually being at a company. Now we're going to start use Scrum or Kanban or whatever it is, and this is how you do it for 12, 15 teams. That doesn't really make any sense. So because we function some way, we have different requirements, we have different things to do. So why should we actually need to enforce some kind of behavior if it doesn't work for us? So like you say, it's agile. We need to adapt to our own reality and make it work for us, not the other way around.
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking, because you were mentioning that you had a platform team and a DevOps team as well. in the platform team, do you have all the roles represented there as well? Do you have like QAs and product managers?
Yeah. So in the specific case of the platform team, there are mostly developers. There's Q&A personnel also, and there's I would say a part-time product owner. So they don't actually require a full-time product owner, but they have that role filled in with someone that they share among other teams. But yeah, they have that. They have that. So those specific jobs. We are also onboarding on terms of our own team on SRE onboarding those kinds of roles. So for example, we don't have a Q&A full time, but we have Q&A participating in all our ceremonies and in making part of of our development process. So we are also onboarding some of those roles as well.
Yeah. Now, Simon, was it you that said something about that following the principles, getting stuff. It seems to me that the organization of teams is, the basic organization that we have. It's well. Let me put it more succinctly. We're given so much things that we're told: buy this, follow that, do this, do that. It's normal in an organization to say, okay, you bunch of people, you guys, you're going to do this, and you guys, you're going to do that. It would be interesting and nice if people said, I have these skills and I can work well with these guys over here. Why don't we try to work on this stuff together? And think of it from I know what it was. We're thinking of how to produce for the company, filling in roles like product owners and scrum masters and all those other designated roles. They're really just a waste of the company. It doesn't produce anything of value. It's just another impediment that we put in the stream of stuff that keeps us from getting our jobs done. So it'd be interesting to see how people grow into the sorts of things that SAFe and Scrum and whatnot prescribe, but they should be something that we learn rather than something that we do.
Okay, so we're getting in the chat that your mic is still a little bit low, Howard. Is it possible to turn it up?
Yeah. Is it better right now? Or I can go to the. You know what? I'm going to take it off here and go on to the. I'm going to fix it.
I think that might be better.
Yeah.
So, Johannes, how about you? Are you also using? Are you also doing cross-functional teams with all the roles represented, or how are you organizing your teams?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm opposing Howard with my standpoint a little bit, because I think it's very important that you have a product owner and you have a Scrum Master, because there's different responsibilities and very, very different work you have to do. But we are at my team, and we are going in that direction, that we have the full chain of responsibilities in our team, in our Umsetzungsteam. It's German. So we talk to the customer, we bring it into production, and we operate it there. So I think it's very important for the quality and also for the responsibility, because I was a dev and an architect before, and if you don't have the responsibility for operations, then operations are afterthought. And now I have to work overtime to operate the thing we're building, and the quality is much higher.
Yeah, because that's interesting. I'm thinking of how, because you mentioned that as well, Ricardo. I think that if you have testers, for instance, or product owners, and you have them on the team, maybe it's not feasible for them to be present full time, or is it? I don't really have a clear answer to that, but I know, for instance, in teams that I've been in before, that there might be too much downtime for a product owner to be 100% engaged with the product that you are building, so that they might need to move between teams.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sorry, just to add on what I was saying, Simon was saying, on our specific case, it doesn't make sense to have someone from Q&A or product management, for example, full time. But it makes sense to have some guidance, for instance, in terms of business. So how we make to help us make some decisions, and even for Q&A people. So we're both mostly managing operations and managing infrastructure, and most of the time things just work, or it's harder, for example, to use things like TDD and that kind of stuff. It has become easier in the past few years, but I remember the first time that I got started using tools like Chef and Puppet or Terraform. It was really hard to actually test code. So it's nice to actually have someone with a kind of a different mindset, for instance, in terms of quality assurance, that we're saying, okay, we're going to test this and that, and they're saying, okay, did you think about this particular case? And oh, okay, we didn't. So it's actually interesting to have those kinds of perspectives, but we don't, at least in our particular case, we don't require someone actual full-time to be that, but only present on certain points of our development cycle.
Well, it seems to me that the management aspect of it is what bothers me, right? The idea of by the way, is this mic better?
Yeah, it's a little better.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I guess the electrons have a longer way to go. I don't mind somebody that holds like the vision, of what the product should be, and keeps on reminding people of where we're going. But when we get to the point of starting to plan efficiency, okay, and so many times, especially in SAFe, people will look at the groups and the teams and how they're interconnected, and then say, oh, well, their load is only at 30%. Oh my God, what else should we have them do? And if you were to design like a network that had 100% efficiency, you would have no bandwidth for anything. Nothing would work. We typically, design networks to peak at like 60, 70%. Even microphones, okay, they don't all run, not mine, at 100%. And I think that teams can feel that when they're much more connected closely to the stuff that they're doing and the customers that they're actually working with. Because otherwise, I've been working on teams where the guys don't even know how to run the product. They know their little slice, they know how to test it, but like, that's an amazing thing. You don't know how to run the thing that you're doing? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
A lot of sense, and in many operations teams, specifically in teams that only deal with infrastructure only, so they know that the site needs to be up or the service needs to be running, but they don't actually understand what the product does and what it means that the product is actually functioning. So the site is up, but I can't log in. So it's the same as not being up, right? But we have like an HTTP check. It gets the page back and everything is working, but it's not really working. So I agree with you on that point. So have someone that actually drives and has the vision of what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to what the question about whether we should be responsible for the things that we also produce, right? If I write a piece of software, then maybe it's reasonable that I am the one that is making sure that it runs, rather than having this famous wall where you just flip over the code artifacts and just have some kind of operations running it. Which I think is essentially the point of DevOps, to actually short circuit that and make sure that we take responsibility for the full life cycle of the product. And that, as you say, Ricardo, at least to me, that really includes being able to operate the product as well, or actually being able to use the product as a user would.
Yep. So, for example, in terms of operations, I don't need to know all the details of what the application entails, all the fine things that it does, but I need to at least, or I should, to at least know, have a general idea of what the product does, what the applications do, and at least, for example, if it's a website, I need to be able to log in and do a few checks and to understand what is happening underneath. Or else I'll just be some guy that puts something running, writes some automation, put some servers up, and that's it. So how do I really understand if something is going badly or no? And that I think that's the whole point of DevOps, to bridge this gap between, okay, I write my code, so now someone runs it, and if it breaks, he deals with it. And I think that's exactly what DevOps aims to achieve. And SRE, and on top of it, it's even more of that, because now we are responsible for the reliability of the platform. So we actually need to understand what the platform does. It doesn't really make sense to just have like blind checks and say, okay, it's up, so it should be running.
Yeah. Well, that
So you have
term.
to.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, Howard.
No.
So as a developer, you have to expand your horizon, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, and as I come from a dev background, I had to learn operations now, and sometimes the hard way. So how do you facilitate the knowledge sharing and the learning? Are there any special formats you have?
We've done
distribute the
two
knowledge?
different. We've done two different things at companies that I've been working at previously, or three rather. One thing that we've done that really has been successful is to enforce monorepo. So we get rid of all the individual repositories and we put everything in one giant repository that everyone works from, right? Including the infrastructure and all the things around as well. So we do infrastructure as code, and we check that in together with the application code. In that way, everything becomes very transparent to the rest of the organization, right? Because they all work from the same code base. You can see that, okay, now Johannes pushed something about setting up some Redis servers in our Kubernetes cluster. Okay, I can have a look at that if I want to learn how to do that. So it really gives these learning opportunities, which I think is great. And the other thing that we've been doing is to organize things like internal open spaces, where you don't have an agenda. You just let the attendees or the engineers basically set the agenda themselves, and go out into breakout sessions and discuss the things that they are passionate or interested in. And that has been really helpful as well. And the third one slipped my mind now, so I'll just leave it at those two.
So in our case, we started by using the traditional kinds of stuff, so like doing internal presentations, internal talks. We also do things where we present regularly, even if it's not, if we didn't make any big breakthrough, but just to keep people on board. Something that we do is to actually start talking about things before we actually implement them. So for example, let's say we were thinking about adopting Kubernetes inside of our organization. We start to bring that conversation up so that people actually feel they are part of the decision, they will contribute with some feedback back. Because if we just say, okay, so we're going to use this technology, and then in 6 months we'll provide some kind of automation and we'll deal with it, that doesn't really work. So we try to bring that kind of practices in place, and of course the usual documentation to be as clear as possible, so that people can attend, for example, a session, then have something on their day-to-day work that they can actually refer to, and always being open. That's the most important part. Always being open to help a development team. For example, like you, I've been a developer before, so I was used to, okay, this is not my responsibility. Someone has to deal with it. So always being on the open side of actually, okay, so my application doesn't work. So being available to actually, okay, so let's try and figure it out. Let's sit together. So what's happening? The application doesn't work. The service is not working. So these kinds of practices that we do on a daily basis.
So I was very taken, Simon, by your mono repo. And one of the things that I think is really great about that is that it gets people thinking more like a startup. Okay, in a startup, you don't have time for all these roles and responsibilities. Like, what's the popular term in the last 2 years? Like DevSecOps. Okay, all of a sudden, after everything is done, we're going to worry about security. No, it's everybody's job to be worried about everything. Okay, from what the business is really all about, down through how we do it. Starting with the why and actually ending up with concrete hows. I mean, And if people can see what's going on, focusing on the repo as the source of truth rather than random meetings and so I mean, whenever I see somebody's role and all they do all day is go to meetings, I know that they're not adding value to the organization. There's just no way, right? All they're doing is talking and slowing people down. So I really like your idea of that mono repo. That really caught my attention. I'm gonna remember that.
Yeah, I really think that makes sense because, I mean, when we were starting out, that was actually a new office or a new dev center that we decided to do a little bit differently. So the company that I was working at, they were a large international company with a couple of thousand employees, but they decided to give us the opportunity to create our dev center as if it were a startup within the company. So we were completely cut off from all the, you know, corporate processes and things like that has been introduced over the years. And then we all started by by reading The Lean Startup by Eric Rice. And we're like, okay, so what can we take from this? How can we build an organization that we would like to work in? Coming from the outside, and that was one of the things, as well as removing things like using branches, or at least using long-lived branches, and instead just pushing to master or main all the time, to have it integrate,
Yeah.
Continuously, maybe 20 to 100 times per day. Right. It might sound naive or not scalable, but it actually worked for us, and while it had some downsides, it really allowed us to move quickly and to iterate over it.
About not using feature branches. I've worked with both, so I've seen the good, bad, and the ugly of both approaches. So there's no silver bullet. There are advantages for one or the other, but I always get into that discussion specifically with people that have only used feature branches, as it gets really hard for them to wrap around that. So we are all going to push to the same exact branch. So what happens if everything breaks? We fix it. That's the whole point. We keep integrating and make it actually easier. So we're not going to push a year's of work into that branch. Of course, we're going to do small things, iterative things. So if something breaks, it should be, in theory, easier to actually fix. But it's an interesting discussion to have with someone who is only used to only having to work like with a GitHub flow.
An interesting discussion or a tedious discussion?
It depends. It can be interesting if people are actually open to the possibility and actually try it out. It becomes very tedious if the mindset is completely shut down. And so the feature branch is the only option that there is. So
I'm kind of curious, Johannes, do you have any ideas yourself about how to encourage this learning culture, or how, encouraging?
Yeah, we have
broadening your
everything.
horizons?
We have everything you mentioned, like bar camps, open spaces, and we were in the stages of planning an internal conference, but it got shut down because of the pandemic. Yeah, we also have the inner source approach at the moment. So when we build a product, a service, then it's inner source, open for the whole company. I think that's familiar for you, but it's not familiar for us. And it's very interesting to see what comes out of this. So there are sometimes there come out tools, and if you have silos, and we have a lot of silos, team silos, and then there's a repository for GitLab CI, Docker container, for example, which has a lot of tools, and it's maintained. And then everybody starts using this container and does not waste any money developing them the Docker container themselves. So, and what's also interesting, there's a lot of doubt even in my team. Oh, can we use this? Is it maintained? In the last year, everybody steps up. So these things get maintained by the community, by the inner community, and I think that's a very very cool cultural development at our company. But you have to have the engineers that take responsibility.
When you do like that, when you have inner sourcing, how do you? Because it seems to me that it would be hard to differentiate between, when there's actual overlap, or when there is accidental overlap, or rather that it's overlapping right now. So for instance, say that I want a Docker container for running Nginx, and I see that you are maintaining a Docker container for running Nginx. How would I know that you're not planning to add some feature into that is totally opposite to what I want from the Nginx container? How would I, be able to make that distinction if I should fork it, or if I should use yours or create a whole separate repo? Because I think that could be a
Mhm.
interesting issue in that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, usually we talk to each other.
Talking, what's that?
Yeah. We talk, and I'm always happy if someone uses my stuff, and
Sure.
I experienced that too.
Well,
So, we solve it by talking.
it brings up a good point though. Okay, because if you overplan these things and you make them into these wonderful, great, pure, libraries of stuff that's ready to pick off, you're never going to get anywhere. And I know that, like at Amazon, they work under the principle that, you got stuff that I like, great, I'm going to use it. Okay, and then I decide later on to take it a different way. Great, I'll fork it off, do what you want with it. And they don't overplan, and they think about moving forward rather than trying to optimize. And I think that's a wonderful concept. And it's nice that people talk, right? But talk for itself, and people should be able to move forward and not be inhibited at some kind of stage gate of whatever. Anyhow,
Definitely. And I'm thinking, if we circle back a bit in to the ownership part, and how to address the question of who is responsible for something.
right.
How do you have any suggestions on how we actually go about doing that to make sure that it's just not an inspirational poster on the wall saying shared ownership, everyone owns everything, right? But something that we actually practice and that we believe in. How would
Yeah,
that look in practice?
I think it's a matter of trust, right? If you can't trust somebody, to do something that's critical, let's say push out new IAC code, right? You might want to institute, something with a GitOps pull, right? So that you can give me a pull request. I'll review the stuff that you did, and then once I know that you're safe in doing those things, like fine, just commit it yourself. Don't bother
Mm,
me.
mm,
You got to have some. You don't want to push, right? And I think that um, well, I believe in things like code reviews and working together and pair programming. When people don't know anything, mob programming. Okay, I believe in all that stuff. But at some point, you will have people that know more than others, and perhaps they don't trust that these newbies are doing the right things. Make them do a pull request. What do you
yeah.
think about that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that actually makes sense. So we actually do a bit of that when we are trying to onboard teams to actually follow a new strategy, a new platform. And as soon as we are confident that they're okay, they know what they're doing, they just go with it. Just go with it.
Yeah.
If you need help, we'll be here, but just go with it. So we one thing that helped that path is to actually provide some sort of standardization and some guidelines so okay, so this is how you are used to doing this, and we think this is a good approach. And teams also have the empowerment to come to us and say, okay guys, so we think it's better to do things this way or that, or that we should move this approach to a different approach. But as soon as we do that, we feel confident. We don't need to be blockers of anything. So you want to deploy, just go. Just go. We'll be here to help if you guys require something. But we are comfortable. We know what you guys are doing. Just submit your pull requests, review it, and proceed. We don't want to be blocking anyone. So I
Yeah.
actually think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and you also said something earlier about like TDD.
Hmm.
So when if we concentrate on writing good code, okay, people will be able to read the code and see all of the tests, the small tests, and get a much better sense of how to use this thing rather than having some boot camp for 2 weeks or working with them forever. So I quality in the code and that mono repo kind of concept to me makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if they utilize TDD, also hopefully at least they'll do some kind of small change, and they maybe didn't get it right, and the test suite will tell them, right, that okay,
Right.
now you need to figure out how this works because now the tests are failing due to your small change that you did.
Right.
So it's probably a pretty good way to onboard people in general. But I'm also I think it's funny that you mentioned mob programming, because that's actually the third thing that slipped my mind. We did a lot of mob programming as well,
Yeah.
and for onboarding new people or for sharing knowledge between roles, that's really invaluable. You don't have to do it all the time. You don't need to have it as the go-to practice. But if you come to an ops team, for instance, or a SRE team, and you've never done SRE before, if you sit with them and do mob programming for a month or two, then you get to brain pick them for 8 hours every day. All the knowledge that they've amassed over the years or whatever they've been working in the company, you get access to that full time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really an invaluable way to get people off to a flying start. Definitely.
A few years ago at Alaska Airlines, there were some teams that were trying to do iOS programming. They wanted to put together like iPad apps, and this is in the bad old days before Swift. And the way that they did it was they went out and like bought these huge monitors, and the guys that they had no idea of iOS, and they would just put a guy who knew iOS, start developing some stuff. He could be talking about what he's doing. He'd answer questions, and as soon as push the keyboard to him and say, "Okay, go ahead, you do it now for a while." And
Hmm.
it was a great way to get people up to speed on new frameworks, new way of working, new way of thinking. It's an invaluable tool. Wouldn't do it all the time though.
No, if you do it all the time, it's probably a time waste, right? Because
Yeah,
it practically forces you to have one active writer, and the rest of the team will be your brain trust,
Yeah.
basically. So
yeah. And
it could definitely be a time waste.
people get bored and they start wandering around and not doing anything, and that
Yeah.
can facilitate that too.
Yeah.
But you don't want to do that too much.
Yeah, I think it's useful for these kinds of things that Simon was saying, like to onboard someone and giving someone up to speed, or actually to break. So there's something really complex, and you just gather around a bunch of people that are going to work on that particular problem and have them mob programming for a while, and that's very very valuable.
Hmm.
I think you have a strict process to put in place for mob programming, so that if you people that two are not slacking off. But that's my experience with mob programming. That two are anywhere but not at the code.
That's college all over again, right? So a group of four still don't do anything.
Yeah.
Well, now you can have
Yeah.
something for the managers to do. They could walk around with a stick, and people aren't.
The dark ages.
But with all those interesting concepts, like mob programming, maybe especially, it's quite easy to start to behave like some kind of hive mind, right? Where
Yeah.
you work together and you collaborate on everything all the time. So you start thinking about the same way when you reason about problems. And how do you avoid having that happen? I'm thinking, for instance, that we are a mix of introverts and extroverts, and
Right.
we might have other attributes that makes this kind of work harder when we try to streamline it or push everyone in the same direction. How would you address that?
I haven't ever seen that happen.
Mm.
For the most part, I see people that are unfamiliar and in a mobbing situation act like what do they call that? Ducks, where um, they glom onto what the person is doing and they act that way.
Mm.
And if that's a bad way of doing something, it's not a great thing to correct later. Um, you know, uh, obviously you have used mobbing in situations where people have opinions and know how to do things, and maybe they conflict and they work together and figure out a better way of doing it. For me, that's pairing. Because
Hmm.
too many opinions and too much stuff going on is going to keep from getting anything done. But again, that's just me.
Definitely.
Yeah, if you have too many people and too many people giving their opinion, you start having some roadblocks that you have to discuss why we are going to approach this in 4 different ways. So that actually makes some sense. But having some diversity on that kind of teams also can help, and can both help and actually bring some problems to the table. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm thinking if we do things like mob programming, or we do open spaces, or I don't remember what the term you used, Johannes, but bar something, right? You have,
Camps.
yeah.
I don't know if
you,
this is an international term or just a German term.
if you do all of these things, all of those things are kind of relying on people being extroverts, right? So
Right.
how do you fit the introverts into this this work as well? Because there is at least I think there should be a place for introverts on the teams as well, and
Yeah.
doing all of these extrovert activities might really put them off or make them feel uncomfortable. So how do we address that?
At least someone needs to be facilitating in some way, shape, or form this kind of discussion, because it can be, for like you were saying, you can have like 2 or 3 people, or for only one people that can make the monopoly of the whole discussion and try to pass their own ideas through. So if that person, for example, that's overwhelming everyone with the discussion, doesn't actually ask for opinion, we need to at least have someone to actually moderate that kind of discussion and to actually ask for opinions. Say, okay, so Ricardo said this, what do you think about it? Do you think it's a good idea? If it is, why do you think it is a good idea? If not, what would you do differently? So at least that at least someone that does that bridge should have in this kind of discussions. It doesn't even need to be someone particularly technical or developed. It can be just someone to actually facilitate, like in an agile ceremony, where you have someone to actually facilitate the agile ceremony. That doesn't even need to be part of the team itself.
Can't we build a chatbot that has artificial emotional intelligence? To solve this.
we could.
Let's see. I'm just gonna quickly check whether we have any Q&As. Nothing yet. So
nothing
sorry.
yet. Yeah.
I'm enjoying talking to you guys.
Yeah. Same. We still have a few minutes.
Okay.
I would like to add to the introvert discussion. I have a very strong introvert in my team, and he usually benefits from having an agenda in a meeting. So if we discuss something, he has time to prepare, and also he likes to read, so that he can process in his own speed.
Nice.
And we started this with a bar camp, so some sessions that were held and get written down, and there are internal publication, so an internal technical blog, and that helps a lot.
Yeah.
That sounds really good.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah.
That's very useful for meetings too, right? To have an agenda where you don't go into a meeting that just has a title and you don't really know what you are going to discuss. So Kubernetes migration.
I don't have a problem with that, but for my colleague, it's very useful.
Yeah, but it's also useful in this kinds of situations, so that the discussion doesn't derail to 10 different things when we only want to focus on something.
Maybe taking that one step further and doing some of these activities as asynchronous activities as well. Having, for instance, the conversation in a GitHub issue or in a internal forum, and encouraging to have some of these meetings that way instead, so that people actually have time to prepare. They have time to think things through in their own pace, and don't have to be put on the spot and having to answer instantly to whatever question comes up. That could probably help as well.
Yeah, Johannes, you must have some emotional intelligence yourself to recognize that an introvert needs to find a way to participate. And that's a good quality for team members to know each other.
Our Scrum Master is very strong in this regard. So we also use the Myers-Briggs 16 personalities. So we
Yeah.
we know each other a little bit on that regard.
And with let's keep that as the end note, that we applaud Johannes for his emotional intelligence in recognizing that. And it's been really, really great to speak to y'all. And there were a lot of valuable insights during this conversation, I think. Do you have any of you have anything you'd like to say before we end?
It was really nice. Yeah. Yeah, go
Sound
ahead.
like an executioner. You know, do you have anything to say before we pass that? No, I'm fine. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, me too. It was really great having a chat with you, with all of you.
So good
I
luck,
leave it on
Howard,
the high
with your presentation coming up.
Okay.
Make sure not to miss that.
Yeah, I have to go to that. Great to speak to you guys.
Thank you
Good to
all.
speak to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Awkward hand wave.
We're still there. Take
2,
care.
1.